It is 5:20 in the morning, May 1st, 1960. May Day, the Soviet Union's most celebrated national holiday. At Peshawar Air Station in Pakistan, a CIA contract pilot named Francis Gary Powers climbs into the cockpit of a Lockheed U-2C reconnaissance aircraft, tail number 566693, Article 360. He has flown this aircraft before. He knows its quirks, its enormous, fragile glider wings spanning 80 feet, its single Pratt & Whitney J57 P37A turbojet engine, the partial pressure suit that squeezes his body like a vice at altitudes where the air has almost no substance at all. He is about to fly 3,800 miles across the heartland of the Soviet Union, from Peshawar to Bodo, Norway. His cameras will photograph ICBM facilities at Sverdlovsk and Plesetsk. The mission is designated Grand Slam. No U-2 has ever been lost over Soviet territory. On paper, none should be. Powers seals his helmet, receives his final briefing, and at 6:26 local time, the aircraft rolls and lifts into the thin morning air. He does not know that this will be the last U-2 mission ever flown over Soviet soil. He does not know that by mid-morning, the Cold War will have changed permanently. To understand what happened on May 1st, 1960, you must first understand the machine at the center of it. The Lockheed U-2 was designed in the mid-1950s by Clarence Kelly Johnson and his team at the famous Skunk Works facility in Burbank, California. It was, by almost any measure, an aeronautical paradox, a jet aircraft designed to fly as slowly as possible, at altitudes as high as possible, for as long as possible. Powered by a single Pratt & Whitney J57-P37A engine producing roughly 17,000 pounds of thrust, the U-2C variant could reach operational altitudes in excess of 70,000 feet, over 13 miles above the Earth's surface. At that altitude, the pilot operated in what aviators call the coffin corner, the margin between the aircraft's maximum speed before structural failure and its minimum speed before an aerodynamic stall was less than 10 knots. One error in throttle management and the aircraft would break apart or fall out of the sky. The U-2 was equipped with a Type B camera system, a 24-inch focal-length unit capable of photographing a 125-mile-wide swath of terrain, with enough resolution to identify individual aircraft on enemy airfields from the stratosphere. The intelligence it produced was, in the words of CIA Director Allen Dulles, worth more than anything else in the American intelligence arsenal. It had been flying over Soviet territory since 1956, and the Soviets had been tracking its flights and their own impotence to stop it with growing fury. Francis Gary Powers was born on August 17, 1929, in Jenkins, Kentucky. Coal country, working class, far from the corridors of power in Washington. He earned his wings in the U.S. Air Force flying F-84 Thunderjets, before being quietly recruited in 1956 by the CIA's Office of Special Activities for Project Aquatone, the classified U-2 program. He was not a spy in the traditional sense. He was a skilled, disciplined aviator who was paid a CIA contract salary of $2,500 per month, roughly 10 times the average American wage at the time, to fly single-seat reconnaissance missions over the most heavily defended airspace in the world. He had flown such missions before. Powers was not reckless. He was methodical, precise, and by all accounts a thoroughly professional aviator. He carried with him on every mission a modified silver dollar, hollowed out to conceal a lethal saxitoxin-tipped needle derived from shellfish poison, capable of killing within seconds. It was there if capture seemed imminent and he chose to use it. He did not choose to use it. That decision and everything it set in motion would consume the next 2 years of his life and haunt the remaining 12. The Soviet Union had known for years that American aircraft were overflying their territory, and for years they had been unable to do anything about it. Their MiG interceptors simply could not reach 70,000 feet with enough speed and energy remaining to engage. But by 1960, the equation had changed. The S-75 Dvina, designated by NATO as the SA-2 Guideline, was a two-stage radio command-guided surface-to-air missile system that had entered Soviet service in 1957. The system's V-750 missile could reach altitudes of up to 82,000 feet, a ceiling that, in the right conditions, brought the U-2 within its engagement envelope. The warhead weighed approximately 130 kilograms and was designed to detonate in proximity to its target, scattering lethal fragments across a wide radius. In March of 1960, the U.S. Air Force's Air Technical Center had formally warned the CIA that the S-75 Dvina now had, and this is a direct quote from the warning, a high probability of successful intercept at 70,000 feet. The CIA, after 4 years of uncontested overflight operations, had grown overconfident. The warning was noted. The missions continued. On the morning of May 1, 1960, near Sverdlovsk, a battery commanded by Major Mikhail Voronov was tracking Article 360 on radar. Voronov gave the order. The first of 3 S-75 missiles left its launch rail. At approximately 8:53 in the morning local time, near the village of Kosolino in the Ural region, the first S-75 missile detonated in proximity to Power's aircraft. It did not score a direct hit. It did not need to. The blast occurred behind and below the U-2, and the fragmentation pattern was sufficient to destroy the aircraft's tail section and compromise the airframe's structural integrity. The U-2 entered an uncontrolled descent. Powers, fighting against the disintegrating aircraft, attempted to activate the self-destruct mechanism, a 2.5-pound explosive charge designed to destroy the camera system and sensitive equipment. He could not complete the sequence before the aircraft's disintegrating structure forced him out of the cockpit. He attempted a textbook bailout, but in the chaos, he neglected to disconnect his oxygen hose and found himself half in, half out of the cockpit, tethered to the falling aircraft. He struggled, and the hose broke. His parachute deployed. He descended through 70,000 feet of increasingly thick Soviet air. Somewhere below him, the wreckage of Article 360, cameras, film, navigation equipment, and electronic sensors largely intact, spiraled toward the fields of the Ural region. The mission had been designed around the assumption that no aircraft could survive to provide intelligence. That assumption was now shattered. There is a grim footnote to the shootdown itself. One of the Soviet MiG-19 interceptors that had been scrambled to pursue Powers, flown by Lieutenant Sergei Safronov, was destroyed by the same Soviet missile salvo. His IFF transponder was on the old May codes, not yet updated for the holiday. He was killed by friendly fire. He was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Powers landed in a farm field and was quickly surrounded by Soviet civilians before KGB agents arrived to take him into custody. He was transported to Moscow and delivered to Lubyanka prison, the KGB's operational headquarters in the heart of the city. His interrogation was careful and thorough. Powers, operating under instructions he had received prior to the mission, not in violation of them, disclosed the basic nature of his mission. He confirmed that he had been flying for the CIA. He confirmed the flight's origin at Peshawar and its intended destination at Bodo. He confirmed the purpose, strategic photographic reconnaissance. He did not disclose what he did not know, and he knew very little. He had been deliberately compartmentalized. CIA protocol ensured that contract pilots were given only the operational details necessary for their specific mission. There was no broader network to betray. But the Soviets had everything they needed. They had the pilot, they had his signed confession, and critically, they had the aircraft, or enough of it to prove, beyond any possible American denial, exactly what it was and what it had been doing. On August 19, 1960, Powers stood trial in Moscow's Hall of Columns. He pleaded guilty to espionage under Article 2 of Soviet criminal law. He was sentenced to 10 years confinement, 3 in prison, 7 in a labor camp. He had been, in effect, sacrificed on the altar of a program that had run one mission too many. The political consequences of the shootdown were immediate and severe. The Eisenhower administration's initial response was a calculated lie. NASA issued a cover story claiming that a weather research aircraft had gone missing after its pilot reported oxygen difficulties over Turkey. The story was plausible. The U-2 had flown civilian cover stories before. But on May 7th, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev stepped to a podium in Moscow and systematically demolished the American narrative. He announced that the pilot was alive. He announced that the aircraft's wreckage was in Soviet hands, along with the cameras, the exposed film, which showed Soviet military installations in unprecedented detail, and the pilot's personal items, including the saxitoxin needle. The cover story collapsed entirely. Eisenhower, to his credit, took personal responsibility, the first time an American president had publicly acknowledged authorizing a covert overflight of a foreign nation. The admission, while honorable, was diplomatically catastrophic. The four-power Paris summit, scheduled to open on May 16th, collapsed before it began. Khrushchev arrived in Paris, demanded a formal apology, did not receive one, and departed. Whatever fragile architecture of East-West dialogue had been constructed through 1959 was, in the space of 2 weeks, rubble. The Cold War, which had briefly shown signs of thaw, froze hard again. Powers served 1 year and 9 months of his sentence in Vladimir Prison, east of Moscow. On the morning of February 10, 1962, he was transported to Berlin. On the western side of the Glienicke Bridge, a gray, mist-shrouded span over the Havel River that had quietly become the preferred venue for Cold War prisoner exchanges, stood Rudolf Ivanovich Abel, known also as William Fischer, a senior KGB illegal officer who had been operating in the United States since 1948 before his arrest in 1957. The exchange was arranged through the quiet diplomacy of New York attorney James Donovan, the same man who had originally defended Abel at trial. At the agreed signal, both men walked toward each other from opposite ends of the bridge. They passed in the center without acknowledgement. Powers stepped onto West German soil. He was free. His return to the United States was not a hero's welcome. Congressional committees questioned whether he should have activated the self-destruct mechanism, whether he had spoken too freely to his captors, whether he had, in some fashion, failed his country. A CIA review board ultimately concluded that he had conducted himself in accordance with his instructions and had revealed nothing beyond what any trained interrogator would have extracted. The criticism was largely uninformed. It was also deeply unfair. Powers was quietly cleared. He never flew for the CIA again. Francis Gary Powers spent the remainder of his life trying to reclaim a reputation that had been damaged by circumstances largely beyond his control. He flew as a test pilot for Lockheed, then as a traffic and news helicopter pilot for KNBC in Los Angeles. On August 1, 1977, his helicopter ran out of fuel and crashed near Van Nuys, California. He was 47 years old. It was a quiet, almost anonymous end for a man whose name had once been on the front page of every newspaper in the world. The U-2 itself continued to fly. It still flies today, operated by the U.S. Air Force over conflict zones and contested borders, a testament to the enduring value of the machine Kelly Johnson built in secret 6 decades ago. In 1998, the details of the U-2 program were formally declassified. In the year 2000, CIA Director George Tenet posthumously awarded Powers the Director's Medal for his service and his conduct under the most extreme duress. His son, Francis Gary Powers, Jr., spent years working to restore his father's reputation, and in 2012, 50 years after the Glienicke Bridge exchange, the U.S. Air Force awarded Powers the Prisoner of War Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross. What the incident of May 1, 1960 ultimately revealed was not the weakness of one pilot, but the overconfidence of an intelligence apparatus that had forgotten the oldest axiom of operational planning: prepare for the mission that goes wrong, not just the one that goes right. Powers did his job. It was the system around him that failed to anticipate the cost.